You know, there have been a lot of people trying to figure out the mindset of this shooter in that Colorado theater the other day. Dr. Henry Paul joins us. He's a psychiatrist, educator, and author. He's helped thousands of children and their parents for over 25 years. In addition to being in private practice, also the executive director of the Karen Horney Clinic in New York City, and the author of When Kids Need Meds, Everything a Parent Needs to Know About Psychiatric Medication and Youngsters. Dr. Paul, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
What, we heard this story about this notebook that the alleged shooter sent back to the school, and I'm curious why. I mean, it pretty much detailed his plan. Why would he do something like that?
Well, it seems to me that action of sending a notebook, and I think it was to a psychiatrist who would be considered a helper, might have been evidence of a bit of ambivalence on his part about carrying out the act. Because deep down, a guy like this, although he's a mass murderer and did what he did, he's a human being who was probably in deep, deep layers of conflict. And prior to this act, this heinous act, there was probably a shred of humanity persistent in his personality, which might have wanted to stop the act or have someone external to him stop the act.
So he didn't want to do it himself. He wanted somebody else to come in and make that decision for him.
Right. It's not that he didn't want to. He couldn't. He didn't have the internal strength to be able to inhibit this tremendously growing devilish impulse he had to take out so many people. He couldn't take the responsibility for that part of his personality. A person like this is a very fragmented person, and although we are looking for simple explanations of the personality of such a person, there is no simple explanation, and I think the more we learn about him, we'll see how fragmented and dissociated his personality really was.
Are there common threads among people who do this kind of activity, who do this kind of action?
Generally, yes, but we have to be careful not to apply the generalities to the specific. Unfortunately, most people who do these things either die by suicide or die by suicide by cop, so to speak. They get killed during the act or after the act. But what we do know from the mass murderers that are still alive, and we will learn from this person as we study him, that most of these people are chronically depressed, chronically alienated and isolated, but most important, they're revengeful and vindictive. They have a deadness inside of them. And this act is usually, in my opinion, an act to give them a false sense of being alive in a very sick and destructive way, but a feeling of aliveness for them, but aliveness like being dead on the heap of destruction. So it's an attempt, as crazy as it might seem, it's an attempt to feel something in a personality which is becoming engulfed more and more by a feeling of deadness.
Doctor, sometimes when you hear about people cutting themselves or doing certain actions to cause themselves pain, they say it's so that they can feel something or feel something other than the emotions they're feeling inside. This is obviously on a whole different plane, a much more extreme case, but is this kind of what you're talking about?
Well, it's similar in the fact that there's destruction in the service of feeling something. The difference is, of course, that self-mutilation, and this is mutilation of others. But it's a very interesting point, actually, that you bring up, because when you speak to people who we call cutters, for lack of a better term, they will tell you that often they don't feel the cutting. They don't feel anything until they see the blood. They actually develop a type of tactile skin anesthesia during the act. And as they're doing the cutting, they kind of come to life and feel something. And again, just like I said with this young man, it's a way of feeling aliveness in a deadening personality.
Now, in following that up, in most of these cases, you do find that the people who perpetrate the act don't survive. Why did he survive? And then why did he tell the police about the booby traps in his apartment?
Well, again, you see, here's a great question. Like, why did he send that letter? Why did he tell him about the booby traps? We don't quite know, but again, it shows the conflicted and contradictory thinking of such a person. I would guess that there was some fragment of wanting to not carry out the booby trap. But, he even said, on the other hand, after he did the act, I'd like to see a lawyer.
Yeah.
Which shows that he knew what he did was terrible. But again, we're not going to get a single answer. But I think it was part of that ambivalence that I talked about. And ambivalence is another word for conflict or mixed feelings. And although we tend to look, generally, we human beings tend to look at simple, singular explanations, we're not going to find that here.
Especially with someone who seems to be as intelligent as this person is. It's very complex, isn't it?
Yes, it's very complex. And, intelligence has nothing to do with mental illness, which he suffered from. Usually these people are not flagrantly psychotic. They're usually suffering from severe personality disorders and depression. But I think as what happened with this young man, is that there were signs already in the several months prior to the act of a deterioration in his personality. He was feeling what we call prodromal symptoms, probably. In other words, symptoms that come before an actual breakdown, and it would have been a depression breakdown. And so there were signs of this. He was ordering online. He was withdrawing from people. He wasn't doing well in school. And finally, something must have tipped him over. It might have been a rejection. It might have been a failure in school. It might have been something most of us don't consider cataclysmic, but he did. And
intelligence doesn't necessarily have anything to do with being stable. Quite a few serial killers were considered very intelligent, very charismatic.
Well, no, intelligence, although in general mental illness tends to be sequestered more among poorer people and more among less intelligent people. Some studies show that. My experience has been intelligence has nothing to do with psychopathology, and you'll find severe illness in developmentally delayed people as well as extremely intelligent people.
Dr. Henry Paul, thank you so much. Once again, the book, When Kids Need Meds, Everything a Parent Needs to Know About Psychiatric Medication and Youngsters. Thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doctor.